Okay, this video is part 12 from a book review called The British Imagination by Peter Watson, but it's going to be a subsection of eugenics, and so this will be part 1 of eugenics. So we're going to start out with Charles Darwin, because Charles Darwin really opened the door to expansion of eugenics and atheism and secular control and communism. So the big thing that Charles Darwin said is that new species arise out of natural selection, whereby a new trait is developed in an animal, and then because it improves survival, it gets selected. Okay, and by getting it selected, it then reproduces and makes more of itself. So here's his original book, 1859, On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Now, this guy right here, Thomas Huxley, was called Darwin's bulldog. And what Huxley really wanted to do in England was promote atheism. And he saw Darwin's mechanism of speciation as a way to do it. Okay. Darwinism, by the way, including the modern version, neo-Darwinism, has nothing to do with the origin of life, nothing at all. And it cannot explain the origin of species. It can explain variety in a species, that's microevolution, but it cannot explain macroevolution, the development of new body types, not at all, okay? This is all well known. I majored in evolutionary biology, A+ student at Stanford, I've followed it since then. One of the points I want to make is there was a big push coming out of England that people who were not from England were basically inferior. Like the Irish, they considered them slaves and sort of stupid and worthless. And, you know, my father's from Ireland, so I resent that a little bit. They also thought the same of people of South American and Middle American descent. You know, my mother's from Puerto Rico, so I would be labeled an inferior subspecies by the English of the late 1800s. Here is a painting of an Irish potato famine where the Irish family is kicked out of their house. They bring armed guards. They take the family out of the house. And what they would typically do is burn down the house so the people couldn't come back to it. Then they take their land, use it for cattle ranching or something. They brutalized the Irish. They intentionally starved them and killed them to take their land. This is just a typical way people felt. The British guys all rich, dressed nice, all the food in the world, and they let the Irish starve and die, and that's why like half of Ireland either died or went to the USA in the 1840s with the potato famine. Now, some other big events that are leading towards this change in the worldview of many people in Europe was the Copernican inversion, saying that the Earth is not in the center of everything, but the sun is in the center. And a lot of people thought that this was an insult to mankind and planet Earth. Okay? Copernicus didn't initially have the data to support his idea. He's just going in that direction. They also thought people that weren't from Europe were basically backward and stupid. Okay, that was the attitude of the people in England, and especially because England was so powerful, you know, by the 1800s, ruling most of the world. Okay, they saw non-English people like South Americans, you know, with cannibalism and stuff. They felt that they were very backward. Okay, and Charles Darwin went on beyond writing his Origin of the Species. He then wrote another book called The Descent of Man, and he basically claimed that we come from an ancestor with chimpanzees. Okay, and by the way, I given a previous lecture, there's very good reason to think, and it's proven, it's known, we are very, very different than chimpanzees. Our brain's more than 3 times as large as a chimpanzee. We have tons of different genes. We have orphan genes that have no homologue in the chimpanzees. But I just want you to know, see where this comes. And also, Darwinism is bogus. Okay, everybody who really knows Darwinism knows it's bogus. They can't explain macroevolution. They cannot explain the lack of transitional forms in the fossil record. They've been searching for them for, you know, about 150 years. They cannot find them. Okay, this is highly relevant. This is what's going on. So Darwinism is bogus. The reason it gets all this publicity is because it's used as the creation story of atheism. Secular rulers want atheism so they can bring back slavery. This is all well known. I realize to the average audience they don't know what I'm talking about, but that's your fault for not reading if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's not my fault for telling you the basics. Okay, now here's another guy who was part of a player in the 1800s with Darwinism. This is Herbert Spencer, and he coined the term survival of the fittest. And you have to remember, Britain just felt they were totally superior to everybody else on the planet in the 1800s because their little tiny country ruled most of the planet. You know, the sun never set on the British Empire. I'm going to show you another guy. First of all, I just got to show you this one guy from Dr. Charcot. He was a neurologist in France. And here he is at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. And Freud went and trained with him. Freud, later became a psychologist of some sort. Okay, here, let me show you the next slide here. And Freud really came up with a degrading way to look at mankind. Freud basically said, this painting is a mockery of it, that man is all he thinks about is his Johnson, that almost all of his thoughts are sexually repressed or indirectly related to sexuality. And he labeled people these obnoxious things and made up these complexes, like saying that, Oedipal complex, that all men want to sleep with their mother. That's ridiculous. That is completely ridiculous. I can remember the first time, I was playing basketball and the ball got stuck on the side between the rim and the backboard, and I had to climb up the basketball pole to go get the ball, okay? And when I was climbing up the ball, something surprised me that had never happened before down below, and I'm like, what the hell was that? And I asked my brother what it was, and he told me, okay? So I was like in about 6th grade or something when that happened, so I didn't know anything about sex. I couldn't have had a thought about sex until I was that old, okay? Anyways, I think that's pretty typical for guys. Then the other thing was Karl Marx. So this was sort of the trifecta. Freud saying that mankind is just a sexual degenerate who hides it. The Earth's not in the center with Copernicus. Darwin saying we just come from chimps. The degradation of mankind from the previous Christian idea of being created in the image of God. Okay? And then the next guy to come along, the big player in England in eugenics, was Francis Galton. And he was, distantly related to Darwin, and he started to study family trees. And he came to the conclusion that most geniuses and really high-achieving people, they came from, very talented, intelligent families. And the emphasis being that the claim that high achievement and intelligence was primarily hereditary. And so that was Francis Galton. He's called the father of eugenics. And England felt they, of course, had superior genes to anyone else in the world. And a lot of rich people, elites, felt this was part of the reason why they wanted to decrease the number of the population. And a big player in this was a very rich guy named Bertrand Russell. And he sort of felt, we got all these stupid people. The best thing we could do is just decrease the world's population. Okay, he wrote a history of Western philosophy, and it's a piece of crap. It's like the worst version. I read a whole bunch of history of Western philosophy books, okay? And his book was like one of the worst. All right, another guy who he actually worked with was Alfred North Whitehead. He was a mathematician, philosopher from England. And together with Bertrand Russell, they wrote Principia Mathematica, okay? And so they were pioneering in some of their work with mathematics, but Alfred North Whitehead was a lot more reasonable. He says, what is morality? It's what the majority wants in terms of how it's determined in a regular society. And he also talked about the importance of Christianity. No period in history has ever been great unless they have high moral ideals. They don't necessarily live up to them, but they should have them and try for them if they're going to achieve much. He also said the power of Christianity lies in its revelation in an act of which Plato had divined in theory. So that's a little bit more of that idea of, like Nietzsche had said, Christianity is Platonism for the masses, okay? And I actually think that primarily relates to Protestantism. Protestantism comes out of Plato to Augustine to Luther, okay? There's a lot of similarity there, versus the Roman Catholic Church is much more Aristotelian, okay? And it coexisted with paganism for 500 years. Okay, but here's a good line from Alfred North Whitehead. The Protestant Reformation was one of the most colossal failures in history. It threw overboard what makes the church tolerable and even gracious, its aesthetic appeal. Yeah, that's one of the best things about Christianity, that it's beautiful. Forget about heaven, just for enjoying life here on earth. It celebrates beautiful art and painting and music and the saints' day and the family and the Virgin Mary, Queen of Heaven. There's tons of party days in Spanish in Catholicism, okay? And he says Protestantism kept its barbarous theology. Do as we say or you'll burn in hell. The Protestants threw the Celtic crosses into the sea. They ripped up paintings. They smashed sculptures. They smashed stained glass windows. They were like a bunch of barbarian thugs. Okay, so anyways, just kind of setting a little bit of a counterweight to Bertrand Russell and to Francis Galton and Darwin and all these eugenicists in England, okay, and they felt that it was destiny that England should conquer the world and subjugate all the other peoples and races and nationalities, and that would be the best thing for the world. That was their attitude. Okay, so that's the end of part one. We'll come back to what happened, the continuation of this in the United States. USA went even bigger on it than England.